He walked into the mountains seeking peace from a past that never let him sleep. But what he found instead was a cruelty so cold it stole the breath from his lungs. In the blizzard-scarred forests of Colorado, where the trees groan under the ice, a former Navy SEAL stumbled upon 3 German shepherd puppies duct-taped to a frozen pine, abandoned as offerings to the storm. Above their trembling heads, a note read, "Leave them die." But fate had other plans. What began as a desperate rescue turned into a war against the blizzard, a blackout during emergency brain surgery, and the relentless fight to save a paralyzed pup who refused to surrender. It is the story of 3 little warriors, and the man who discovered that saving them would save him too. Before we step back into that storm, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country below. And if you believe miracles still happen, hit subscribe. You're going to need tissues for this one. The morning forest lay wrapped in a brittle winter stillness, the kind that seemed to hold its breath beneath the weight of untouched snow. Ethan Hale stepped onto the narrow trail leading from his cabin, his boots sinking through the top crust of ice with soft, muffled cracks. At 42, he carried the build of a man carved from years of disciplined violence, broad-shouldered, narrow-waisted, with the rugged endurance of someone who had survived more winters than he remembered. His beard, a dark blend of chestnut and early silver, clung to his jaw like frost-touched bramble, while his eyes, storm-gray and deeply set beneath heavy brows, watched the world with the wary alertness of a predator long deprived of rest. His hair, kept just long enough to be tied at the nape, lifted slightly in the biting wind. He had once been a Navy SEAL, the kind people whispered about, Unit 3, reconnaissance specialist, the quiet shadow slipping through enemy lines. But war had carved fault lines inside him. The blast that took half his team had left no visible scar on his skin, yet it left a canyon inside his chest. It hollowed him, made him feel like a ghost wearing a man's body. He retreated to this forest not to find peace, but because silence was the only thing he trusted not to betray him. Every morning he walked the same ridge, hoping routine would tame the restless turbulence inside him. The therapist he never visited enough called it hypervigilance. Ethan simply called it staying alive. He inhaled, letting the cold knife into his lungs. The air tasted metallic, sharp as a memory he didn't want. The pines shivered overhead. The world smelled of pitch, frost, and something faintly electric, an omen of the storm gathering beyond the foothills. He didn't mind storms. Storms gave shape to the chaos in his chest. But on this morning, something felt off. Not the usual unease. Something more pointed, more deliberate, like an invisible hand plucking a single wrong string in the symphony of the woods. He stopped walking. His breath formed a ghostly cloud, suspended for a beat before dissolving. Then he heard it. No sound exactly, but the absence of one. Birds had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold still. That stillness, unnatural and dense, crawled up the back of his neck. He moved slowly, his muscles instinctively lowering into the quiet readiness learned from years moving through hostile terrain. His hand brushed the handle of the knife strapped to his thigh. Worn leather, the blade sharpened every night even though he hadn't used it in months. A glint of silver caught his eye ahead. Too clean, too straight, too foreign in the wild. Metallic, artificial. Ethan narrowed his eyes and stepped off the trail, trudging through thigh-high snow. The closer he got, the more his body rebelled, each instinct screaming the same thing. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Then he saw the tree. An old ponderosa pine, trunk thick enough that 3 men would struggle to wrap their arms around it. Its bark was scarred with deep ridges, yet something else clung to it, cold and gleaming, silver duct tape, a strip of it wrapped brutally tight, and beneath it, small shapes, 3 of them. Ethan's heart stopped, then began beating so hard it throbbed behind his eyes. 3 German shepherd puppies, no older than 6 weeks, were bound to the trunk. Their tiny jaws were sealed shut with tape, their bellies strapped so tightly their ribs strained against their fur. Snow clung to their coats, turning the black and tan pattern into mottled frost. The smallest one sagged limp, head drooping, while the other two trembled in exhausted, feeble spasms, barely clinging to life. Pinned above them, fluttering against the bark, was a torn scrap of notebook paper. The ink had bled in the cold, but the message remained unmistakably cruel. "Leave them die." Something inside Ethan snapped, not loudly, but with the finality of a bone giving way. The forest blurred as a surge of heat and cold crashed through him at once. Suddenly, he was back on the broken street in Fallujah, smoke in the air, a boy no older than 12 reaching out to him with trembling fingers, whispering words Ethan never forgot. "Don't leave me." And Ethan, bleeding, half-blind, unable to lift the debris crushing his legs, had watched the child stop breathing before help arrived. He never forgave himself. The sight before him tore open that same wound, raw and screaming. His breath turned ragged. His hands shook, not from fear, but fury. A violent, primal rage he hadn't felt in years burned through his veins, hot enough to melt the snow under his boots. "Who did this?" he growled under his breath, voice cracking. "Who dares?" No answer came, only the soft rattle of a puppy's faint breath, so weak it might stop any second. The smallest pup lifted its eyes, meeting Ethan's gaze. In those eyes he saw not fear, but quiet surrender, the kind that begged without begging. "If someone doesn't help, now. I'm gone." Ethan dropped to his knees so hard the impact jarred through his bones. The cold stabbed into his skin, but he didn't feel it. All he felt was the overwhelming surge inside him, an ancient instinct, deeper than duty, deeper than training. He reached out with trembling hands. "I'm here," he whispered, voice hoarse. "I'm not leaving you." In that moment, with 3 fading lives clinging to a tree and his own ghosts clawing at the edge of his mind, Ethan Hale understood something with terrifying clarity. He had not come here to seek peace. He had come here because fate was waiting. And now, fate had spoken. The storm thickened around Ethan as though the forest itself were collapsing inward, flakes whipping horizontally in a white fury that stung his face and lodged in his beard. His breath came out in sharp, smoking bursts as he steadied his trembling hands, forcing them into stillness the way he had done countless times in deserts and war zones where panic meant death. He inhaled slowly, counting, letting the cold burn through his lungs before releasing it through tight lips. The technique, 4-count warrior breathing, had carried him through ambushes, downed helicopters, and nights when silence felt like a blade pressed to his throat. Now, it steadied him as he reached for the first strip of tape. The duct tape had been wound mercilessly tight across the tiny rib cages of the puppies. Ethan worked the blade of his folding knife beneath the first silver band, careful as if he were disarming a mine. The largest pup, who would soon become Bravo, whimpered faintly, its little body shivering violently, frost crystallizing along its eyelashes. The second pup, later named Delta, lifted its gaze weakly, its eyes a warm amber that flickered like embers struggling to stay alive. The smallest, barely moving, leaned limp against the bark, a fragile creature whose soft fur had turned brittle from the cold. That one would become Charlie. Ethan murmured soft words, not for comfort, puppies wouldn't understand, but to keep himself anchored. "Easy, I've got you. Hang on." The final layer of tape snapped and peeled away. The puppies sagged forward, their legs too numb to respond. Ethan's pulse hammered in his temples as he quickly assessed them. They were freezing rapidly. The smallest one barely showed signs of breath. He gathered all 3 into the cradle of his arms, pressing them against his chest. Their fur felt alien against his skin, thin, icy, and terribly still. He shrugged off his heavy, shearling-lined coat, despite the brutal cold slicing through his thermal shirt. Wrapping the coat around the puppies, he tucked the edges tight, creating a cocoon of insulation. His body heat surged outward, chasing back the numbness seeping through their tiny limbs. Ethan gritted his teeth as wind battered him from the side, sharp as gravel carried by a river. He turned his back to it, shielding them, and trudged toward the ridge where his old truck waited. The snow deepened with every step, rising nearly to his thighs. His boots felt like anchors dragging him downward, but he pushed forward, muscles screaming. The storm roared louder, as if testing his resolve. Ethan bent low, angling his shoulders to break through drifts, each movement deliberate and slow. His breath froze on his beard, forming white spikes. The puppies shifted weakly beneath the coat, a faint stirring that stabbed hope into his chest. He tried to quicken his pace as he reached the frozen logging road. The truck, a battered navy blue pickup with rust along the wheel, wells, stood half buried in snow. The sight of it fueled him. Safety was close. But just as he yanked the door open with numbed fingers, the smallest weight in his coat went alarmingly still. Charlie wasn't breathing. A tremor ran through Ethan, but training seized the wheel of his mind. He set Bravo and Delta gently onto the passenger seat, both mewling softly, then pulled Charlie into the crook of his arm. The pup's body was frighteningly limp, its head rolling slightly as Ethan laid it across the console. No, not now. Not like this. He positioned his thumb just behind the pup's tiny elbow, the location of its heart, then began compressions. His thumb pressed in short, firm bursts, barely the strength it took to depress a sponge. The ribs felt like fragile reeds beneath his touch. He worked quickly. 4 compressions, then breath. Ethan covered Charlie's muzzle with his cupped hand, forming a seal, and exhaled a warm puff of air into its lungs. The chest rose minutely, then fell. "Come on, stay with me." He repeated the cycle. 4 compressions. Breath. 4 compressions. Breath. Nothing. A shard of memory stabbed him. The boy in Fallujah, dust in his hair, breath slipping away despite Ethan's desperate hands. For a split second, the storm outside vanished, replaced by smoke and ringing explosions. His heart lurched, his breath stuttered. "Not again," he growled under his breath. "Not this time." He leaned closer, his voice rough with pleading. "Charlie, fight, you hear me? You fight." He gave another breath, then the faintest twitch, a quiver beneath his thumb, a tiny, fragile hiccup of air. Ethan froze. Charlie's chest rose, shallow, sharp, but alive. A sound tore from Ethan's throat, half laugh, half sob. He pressed the puppy back into the coat with its siblings, pulling them all against his body as he slid into the driver's seat. His hands still shook, this time not from cold but from the trembling waves of relief crashing through him. As the engine sputtered to life and struggled against the cold, Ethan whispered the names he had given them. Bravo, Delta, Charlie. He tightened his hold around the coat bundle. "I've got you. I'm not losing anyone today." Outside, the storm howled like a wounded animal. Inside the truck, 3 tiny lives pressed against Ethan's ribcage, their breaths faint but real. A fragile victory wrestled from the jaws of the winter itself. The wind clawed at the truck as Ethan skidded into the small gravel lot outside the mountain rescue station, its lights flickering behind sheets of snow that whirled like ghosts in the darkness. He slammed the driver's door open, clutching the bundled coat against his chest as he ran toward the entrance. His legs trembled, not from exhaustion alone, but from the gnawing terror that the faint breaths he felt beneath the wool might stop at any moment. He shouldered the door so hard that it ricocheted off the inner wall, rattling the row of empty metal kennels lining the lobby. Behind the reception counter stood a woman who startled at his entrance. Dr. Lena Rios was in her mid-30s, tall and slender with long black hair tied back into a messy braid. Stray strands framed her face, highlighting sharp cheekbones and dark eyes lined with the exhaustion of someone who had been awake far too long. Her olive-toned skin bore faint freckles across the bridge of her nose, soft contrasts to a demeanor forged by years of rural emergencies. She wasn't fragile, not in the least. Her posture held an efficient steadiness, the kind people gather around when everything starts to break. Raised in a chaotic household with 6 siblings and a chronically ill mother, Lena had grown accustomed to stepping into crisis without hesitation. Compassion guided her, but discipline anchored her. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice clipped yet calm as she hurried around the desk. Ethan opened the coat without speaking. Words wouldn't come. Fear blocked them, lodging like stones in his throat. He simply revealed the 3 tiny bodies curled against the lining, their fur soaked with melted frost. Lena gasped softly, not with fear, but sorrow. "Get them inside," she said, leading him toward the back. "We move now?" The treatment room was warm, dimly lit, and cluttered with equipment, IV stands, oxygen masks, heating pads arranged in a hurry. A lean young man with sandy hair and square glasses appeared from the supply closet. This was Mark Turner, the night volunteer. At 24, Mark was tall and narrow-shouldered with the awkward gait of someone who'd sprouted too quickly. His face held a gentle, nervous kindness. He had the earnestness of a person raised sheltered, still baffled by cruelty in the world. He stuttered slightly when anxious, something he'd borne since childhood bullying, but he worked with animals because they never mocked him. Tonight, his eyes widened when he saw the puppies. Oh my God," Mark whispered. "Prep the warming table," Lena ordered. "Turn the heat lamps on full." Ethan placed the coat bundle onto the cushioned surface. The pups barely stirred. Lena's fingers moved quickly, checking gums, pupils, pulses. A frown hardened her features. Severe hypothermia. Their veins are collapsing, and the smallest, nearly unresponsive. She looked at Ethan then, seeing not only the frost clinging to his beard and hair, but the emotional storm raging behind his eyes. "We're doing everything we can." Ethan nodded once, his jaw tightening, every muscle held in a rigid brace. He watched as Lena tried to insert a catheter, but the needle slipped. Veins shrunk too far to take it. She exhaled sharply. "No good," she muttered. "We can't get fluids in by vein. Mark, get the IO kit." Mark hesitated. "Are you sure? They're so little." "It's the only chance," Lena said, softer but firm. "Move." Ethan stiffened. "What's an IO kit?" "Intraosseous access," Lena answered without pausing. "We inject fluids directly into the bone marrow. It's painful, risky, but it's what saves animals on the edge." She positioned Bravo, the sturdiest of the pups, and sterilized a small patch along the shin. Mark handed her a pen-sized drill, his hands shaking. Ethan felt his throat constrict as the drill buzzed to life, but he didn't look away. He owed the puppies that much. A small pop sounded when Lena pierced the bone. Bravo jolted weakly. Ethan's fists closed so tightly they whitened. "That's it. Hang on, little one," Lena whispered as she attached the fluid line. Delta was next. Then Charlie. Just as Lena finished securing the line to Charlie's tiny leg, the pup suddenly tensed. Its body jerked uncontrollably, limbs twitching in sharp spasms. "Seizure," Mark cried. Lena steadied Charlie's head. "Hypothermic rewarming shock. Keep him safe. Don't restrain too hard." Ethan felt his heartbeat slam against his ribs. He leaned forward instinctively but froze, terrified that touching Charlie might somehow make it worse. The seizure lasted only seconds but felt like hours. When it stopped, Charlie went terrifyingly still. Too still. "Is he?" Ethan's voice cracked. Lena pressed her ear close to the pup's chest. She frowned. "His heartbeat is weak, but still there. We raise his temperature slowly. No rapid heating." Mark, voice trembling, asked, "Should I get the emergency drugs?" "Not yet. Position him against Ethan." Ethan blinked. "Against me? Your body heat is steady and stronger than the heat pads. Hold him, carefully." Ethan gathered the fragile pup against his chest. Its fur barely stirred beneath his hand. Fear surged up like a rising tide. Fear he had buried for years, now breaking through. His throat tightened unbearably. He bowed his head over Charlie, the warmth of his breath fogging the pup's cold coat. "Please," he whispered, the word ripped from a place he thought long dead. "Don't go." No one in the room spoke. Even the storm seemed to hush outside, giving space to the quiet sob that escaped him. Raw, aching, unexpected. For the first time in years, Ethan prayed. Not to a God he trusted, but to anything that might listen. Lena touched his shoulder gently, her eyes softening. "He's fighting. Let's help him do it." In that dim room, with storm winds screaming beyond the walls and three tiny hearts wavering between this world and the next, Ethan realized he was no longer a man hiding from the past. He was a man dragging life back from the brink. And he would not fail. The storm battered the rescue station with renewed fury, turning the walls into trembling membranes that shuddered under each violent gust. Inside, however, the room seemed frozen in a different kind of stillness, one built from dread, exhaustion, and the fragile threads of hope that tethered three tiny lives to the world. Ethan stood beside the warming table, his arms crossed tightly as if holding himself together. His shoulders were hunched from hours of strain, snow still clinging to the seams of his shirt, his beard damp where melted flakes had soaked into it. His eyes, hardened by years of battle, looked impossibly vulnerable now as they tracked the faint rise and fall of Charlie's chest. Lena moved between machines with practiced efficiency, but tension shadowed her every step. The soft whir of the portable ultrasound echoed through the room as she guided the wand across Bravo's skull, her brows knitting deeper with each pass. She didn't speak at first. She was the sort who delivered truth only when she had the full weight of it. Her breath fogged faintly in the cold that seeped through every crack of the old building. Mark hovered at the counter, hands twisting a roll of gauze, his sandy hair sticking up at odd angles as though fear itself had ruffled it. He didn't dare interrupt. At last, Lena turned off the machine. She removed her gloves, rubbing her temples as if debating how much honesty she should give. Then she looked at Ethan, her dark eyes full of exhausted sorrow. "They all have cerebral edema," she said quietly. "Brain swelling. Severe." Ethan's jaw tightened. "All three?" "Yes." She swallowed, steadying herself. "Bravo's swelling is moderate. Delta's is worse. But Charlie—" Lena hesitated, her voice lowering. "Charlie has significant intracranial pressure. If we don't intervene soon, he may suffer permanent damage. Maybe." She exhaled. "Maybe worse." Ethan stared at Charlie's small form wrapped against the heating pad. The puppy's paws twitched intermittently, not from strength but from neurological misfires. A storm of helpless rage surged through Ethan's chest. "There has to be something." "We need to get them to a neurospecialty hospital," Lena replied, "but the roads are closed. The pass is buried under 6-foot drifts. Even if we had a snowcat, and we don't, it would take hours." She exchanged a glance with Mark, who looked away quickly, unable to hold the weight of it. Lena wiped a hand across her face and reached into a drawer. From it she pulled a clipboard, old, metal, worn from years of desperate nights. Attached to it was a single sheet of paper. Ethan felt dread pool cold in his stomach even before she spoke. "Ethan." Her voice was gentle, too gentle. "If the swelling continues, they'll suffer. It won't be peaceful, and I won't let animals go through agony if there's no chance to save them." She extended the clipboard toward him. "This is an euthanasia consent form." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. The air left his lungs in a ragged exhale. He stared at the paper, at the sterile lines, the blank signature line, and a wave of memory crashed into him. He saw again the medic in Afghanistan, leaning over him after the blast, telling him he had minutes left. "Non-survivable injuries," they'd said. Prepare yourself." Yet here he stood. Broken, yes, but breathing. He stepped back, shaking his head. "No." "Ethan!" "No." His voice was no longer the quiet murmur of a soldier. It was iron, forged by years of refusing to die. He snatched the clipboard, his fingers trembling, not with weakness, but fury, and tore the form neatly in half, then into quarters, then into shreds. Lena inhaled sharply, but not in anger, in grief, in helplessness. "Ethan, I just don't want you to hope for something impossible. I don't want you to hurt more." Ethan looked at her, gray eyes burning with a conviction she hadn't seen in him before. "I was given 0% chance of survival once. 0. Doctors told me I wouldn't make it off the table. But I did." He placed a hand over Charlie, his large fingers dwarfing the trembling body. "I'm not signing away their fight. Not while they're still trying to live." Silence fell, broken only by the muffled screams of the wind outside. Lena's throat bobbed as she swallowed. She wasn't cold-hearted, far from it. The decision she'd offered wasn't born from cruelty, but from the pain of countless animals she had watched slip away despite her efforts. But there was something unyielding in Ethan's stance, something raw and incandescent that whispered of battles fought long after hope should have died. Finally, Lena exhaled. "There is one option," she murmured. "A decompressive craniectomy, skull relief surgery." Mark blinked. "Doesn't that require equipment we don't have?" "Yes," Lena said bluntly, "and training I haven't used since veterinary school. It's risky, incredibly risky." Ethan met her gaze. "Is it a chance?" "A small one," she admitted, "but a real one." Ethan nodded once. "Then we take it." Lena looked back at the 3 fragile lives under her care. She squared her shoulders, drawing strength from Ethan's resolve. "All right," she said softly. "Let's prepare the operating room." Beyond the walls, the blizzard roared. But inside the station, a different kind of storm began, a storm of impossible odds and fragile hope, as 3 small lives balanced on the thin edge between darkness and dawn. The storm hammered the rescue station as if trying to tear it from the mountainside, but inside the small operating room, the world had narrowed to a surgical table no bigger than a child's desk. The heat lamps cast a weak amber glow over the sterile sheets where Delta, the first puppy, lay sedated. Ethan stood stiffly beside the table, his broad shoulders squared, his jaw clenched, his breath steady even though dread coiled like wire inside his chest. Snow still melted in his beard, turning the gray strands darker, and his eyes, steel-hard by habit, now glimmered with something far more fragile. Hope, fighting fear. Dr. Lena Torres stepped to the table with a composure that belied the chaos outside. Her dark hair was tied back in a neat knot, though loose strands clung to her temple from sweat. She was a compact woman in her early 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and hands that moved with a confidence forged from years of crisis. Beneath her calm exterior was a quiet ferocity, a determination born from a childhood raised by a father who was also a veterinarian, a man who used to say, "If you can't choose who lives, you can at least choose who gets a chance." Tonight, she was choosing for 3. "Scalpel," Lena said. Becky, her assistant, handed it to her. Becky stood barely over 5 feet, a petite young woman with copper hair pulled into a messy bun. Freckles splashed over her cheeks. She had only been working at the rescue station for 8 months, drawn to the job because she adored animals. But she had never been tested like this. Her hands trembled faintly, but she forced them to move with precision. The fear in her wide green eyes was overshadowed only by determination. The first incision on Delta's tiny skull was a clean line. Ethan held the puppy's head steady with gentle but immovable strength. His hands, large and scarred, became something entirely different now, delicate, protective, reverent. "Bone exposed," Lena murmured. "Ready," Ethan answered, voice low. The drill whirred to life. A small high-pitched sound from the ophthalmic equipment Lena had repurposed. She lowered the bit with the steadiness of a sniper. A faint sprinkle of bone dust rose. Ethan barely breathed. Then, a soft pop. A subtle shift. We're through. Relief softened Lena's features. Dura is bulging, but intact. She punctured it carefully. A small bead of cerebrospinal fluid escaped. The pressure released. Delta's monitor beeped stronger. "That's one," Lena whispered. "Next." Ethan exhaled shakily. Bravo's surgery was harder. His swelling was more pronounced, the bone slightly thinner. Twice Lena paused, her hands hovering above the drill, recalculating. Becky stood ready with suction, sweat lining her forehead. When the fluid finally drained from Bravo's skull, Becky let out a small, choked sound. A half laugh, half sob. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, murmuring something that sounded like "thank you." And then came Charlie, the smallest, the weakest, the one whose chest barely moved under the warming lamps. Lena positioned her fingers along his shaved skull, her jaw set. "This is the one we may lose," she said quietly. Ethan didn't look away. "Then we don't lose him." She nodded, lifting the drill. The bit touched bone. And the world went black. A violent whoosh swallowed the room as the power died. The heater stopped humming. The monitors fell silent. The anesthesia machine cut out with a sickening click. Becky screamed. Ethan didn't move. And Lena's voice sliced through the darkness. "Nobody move. I still have the drill against his skull." The wind outside howled triumphantly as if reveling in its victory. The darkness felt alive, suffocating. Becky fumbled blindly. I can't see. I can't." "Find the manual bags," Lena ordered. "They're at your right. Feel for them. Do not stop until the power is back." Becky's breath hitched, but she found the bags by touch, fumbling until her hands closed around the tubing. She squeezed once, twice, air filling into Charlie's tiny lungs with each compression. Ethan's voice was steady, commanding. "I've got his head. He isn't moving." Somewhere behind the wall, the generator coughed to life. Weak, flickering, unreliable. A dim amber bulb sputtered overhead, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. Still not enough. "Light," Lena said. "I need light." "My jacket," Ethan growled. "Front pocket, tactical penlight." "I can't break sterility," Lena snapped. "Use your mouth." Becky hesitated, but Lena didn't. She grabbed a sterile gauze, fished the penlight from Ethan's jacket, and bit down on the metal casing. She clicked it on with her tongue. A trembling white beam spilled across Charlie's skull. The image was raw and haunting. Charlie's tiny head held immobile in Ethan's massive hands, Lena leaning over him, jaw clenched around the penlight, shadows carved across her face like war paint. Becky stood between them, her arms straining as she squeezed the ventilation bags with desperate rhythm. "Drilling," Lena murmured, words muffled through the penlight. The drill whined again. The bone trembled under Ethan's fingertips. A crack, sharp, terrifying, split the air. Ethan froze. "Did you breach?" Lena pulled back half a centimeter, eyes narrowing behind the shaky beam. "No, that was bone separation, the fragments stable. Continuing." Seconds stretched, shadows quivered. Becky's breathing hitched as her arms began to shake, but she didn't stop. Then Lena's voice. "I'm through." Fluid welled up, a dark, pink-tinged bead. Charlie's tiny chest expanded deeper than before. Becky sobbed. Ethan's head bowed forward, breath breaking. Lena finally removed the penlight from her mouth, wiping her lips with her shoulder. Charlie had a chance. And that was enough. The storm had finally begun to fade into a distant murmur by the time Ethan and Lena carried the 3 recovering puppies out of the dim operating room. The hallway lights flickered unsteadily, the generator groaning under the strain, but it no longer mattered. All 3 puppies had survived the impossible. Their skulls were sutured with delicate stitches, their heads wrapped in miniature bandages that made them look like tiny soldiers patched after battle. Bravo and Delta, though weak, already showed small sparks of life. The twitch of a paw, a faint whimper, shallow breaths that rose stronger with each minute. Charlie, however, lay still as snow, his chest lifting only because Becky continued pressing the manual ventilation bag with aching hands. When they reached the recovery room, a former storage closet hastily converted into an ICU corner, Lena lowered Charlie onto a warmed fleece blanket. Her face was ghostly pale after hours under surgical lights, and the sweat dampening her dark hair made her look 10 years older. But her eyes, deep brown and quietly fierce, did not lose focus for a second. She placed 2 fingers gently under Charlie's jaw, feeling for the faint flutter of a pulse. "He's holding," she whispered, voice ragged. "For now." Ethan knelt beside the crate-like warming bed where Bravo and Delta rested, his powerful frame casting a protective shadow over them. He was still in blood-specked scrubs loaned from the clinic, his forearms raw from repeated washing, his beard heavy with exhaustion. Yet there was an unmistakable softness in his weathered features now, a kind of tenderness that war had once burned out of him. He brushed a thumb slowly along Delta's tiny ear. "Good fighters," he murmured. "All 3. Becky entered carrying a tray of medical supplies, her slender form swaying from fatigue. She had changed into a fresh pair of soft blue scrubs, too loose for her petite frame, and tied her copper hair back again, though stray strands kept falling into her eyes. She placed the tray down, blinking hard to stay conscious. "Fluids for the night," she said, "and warmers, and I made labels because I'll forget everything if I don't." She offered a sheepish, sleepy smile, showing the freckles dusted over her nose. "Sorry if they're crooked." Ethan glanced at the labels, Bravo, Delta, Charlie, each written in a shaky hand but with little hearts doodled next to them. "Looks perfect," he said quietly. As the hours stretched deep into the night, the recovery room became surprisingly peaceful. The wind had lost its teeth, the generator hummed steadily, the heat lamps warmed the air into a soft, golden glow. Bravo shifted first, a small tremor rippling down his spine. Then Delta stretched one paw forward, his claws clicking faintly on the metal tray. Their strength returned in tiny increments, a twitch, a breath, a whine. Charlie remained motionless. His hind legs lay limp, almost delicate. His breathing was thin and shallow, but his eyes, when they finally fluttered open, held the same dark, burning determination Ethan had seen on the mountain. He met Ethan's gaze, not with fear, but recognition, as though he understood why he was still alive. "He's trying," Lena said softly, watching Charlie. She had changed into a gray fleece jacket, her cheeks flushed with the return of heat to her system. "His neurological pathways need time, days, weeks, maybe more." "Then he gets more," Ethan replied. By dawn, the storm had passed completely. Thin sunlight seeped through the frosted windows, turning the room into a wash of pale gold. Lena discharged the puppies with detailed instructions, though she hesitated at the door. "Ethan, this won't be easy." She held her tablet close to her chest, the tiredness in her eyes softened with respect. "There will be setbacks, nights you think you're losing him. And Charlie, he may never walk on his own." Ethan adjusted the carrier crates now lined with blankets. "Walking isn't the only kind of fighting." With that, he left the clinic and entered the dawn-lit forest road, the puppies carried like fragile treasures. The mountains rose behind him, great pillars of stone and snow, and for the first time since he had returned from the war, he didn't feel small against them. He felt anchored. When they reached the cabin, the silence inside greeted them like an old friend, and then changed forever. Bravo let out a soft bark as Ethan lowered the crates near the fireplace. Delta, clumsy and wobbly, attempted to stand. Charlie watched everything, eyes alert, ears twitching whenever Ethan moved. Ethan spent the next hours transforming the cabin into a recovery ward. The hardwood floor was layered with soft mats. A corner became a medication station with a whiteboard listing dosages. Another became a warm den lined with blankets. The living room, once empty and haunted, slowly turned lively, alive. But the moment that changed everything came when Ethan went into his workshop. The workshop smelled like fresh sawdust and cold steel. It was a place he had rarely entered since leaving the SEALs, a place that held memories of building gear, fixing equipment, planning missions. Now, standing among the tools, he felt the stirring of something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. He gathered aluminum rods, screws, old wheels from a broken dolly, and pieces of nylon fabric. For hours he cut, welded, bent metal, and tightened bolts until sweat rolled down his brow. He shaped a frame sized for Charlie's small body, attached wheels light enough for a pup, and crafted a sling of reinforced canvas. By afternoon, he returned to the cabin with the device. Charlie watched him, head slightly tilted, ears lifting though his hind legs remained still. "You ready for your ride, little warrior?" Ethan whispered. He slid Charlie gently into the sling. For a moment, the puppy simply froze, uncertain. Then, with a tentative push of his front paws, the frame rolled. Charlie paused, then tried again. The wheels turned smoothly. Another push. The frame rolled faster. And suddenly, Charlie moved. He rolled across the room, first in a shaky line, then in a wobbling arc, his eyes brightening with each inch he conquered. Bravo barked enthusiastically and bounded after him. Delta let out a triumphant yip and tried to follow. Ethan stood in the center of the chaos, a hand pressed to his chest, laughter erupting from him. Raw, loud, free. It was the first true laugh he had allowed himself in years. And as Charlie spun in a small circle, victorious in his tiny chariot, the cabin, once a tomb of memories, filled with life again. The first snow of the season drifted down like slow-falling ash, settling over the town of Silver Pines in a soft, white hush. Winter had returned, but this year Ethan stood in the middle of Main Street, not as a ghost lingering on the edges of life, but as a man anchored firmly in it. 6 months after the night that changed everything, the morning felt almost ceremonial. The air held a sharp bite, yet his breath came out steady, mingling with the warm puffs of the 3 dogs gathered by his legs like loyal sentinels. Bravo, once a fragile creature cocooned in a blanket of fear and hypothermia, now stood tall and powerful at Ethan's left side. At 8 months old, he was already 45 pounds of lean muscle, with a deep golden black saddle coat that shimmered under the winter sun. His chest was broad, his legs sturdy, and his amber eyes carried the alert intelligence of a trained guardian. He had developed a habit of scanning the street with the vigilance of a soldier who never quite relaxed, a trait Ethan recognized as a reflection of himself. Bravo had a calm, grounded temperament, often placing a paw on Ethan's boot as if reminding him, "I'm right here." Delta, on Ethan's right, was the opposite in almost every way. She was slightly lighter in build, more athletic, with long legs and a tail that seemed to have a mind of its own. Her ears sat slightly too large for her head, giving her a perpetually curious, bright expression. Delta darted her gaze at everything, the snowflake swirling past, the bakery door swinging open, the teenager biking across the street. Where Bravo guarded, Delta explored. She vibrated with life, her paws tapping the ground impatiently. She had survived surgery and brain swelling just like her brothers, but she had come out of it with the spirit of an arrow always ready to fly. And then there was Charlie. Charlie rolled forward in his custom-built wheelchair, Mark II, redesigned with aircraft-grade aluminum, shock-absorbing tires, and a leather chest harness Ethan had stitched by hand. At first glance, he looked impossibly small inside the frame, but his presence radiated far beyond his size. His eyes were the color of midnight lakes, bright and steady, reflecting a wisdom no puppy his age should carry. Even with hind legs that lay still behind him, He moved with confidence, maneuvering through the uneven snow as if leading a patrol. When people looked at him, their expressions shifted. First pity, then awe, and finally admiration. Charlie didn't provoke sorrow, he commanded respect. Ethan stood between them, a massive figure wrapped in a worn navy blue parka. The years of battle, both physical and internal, were carved into the strong lines of his face, but the harshness had softened. His once cold gray eyes now held flecks of warmth, and the deep creases at the corners of his mouth hinted at smiles that had begun returning to him. The beard across his jaw carried strands of silver, not just from age, but from renewal. A man rebuilt, piece by the 3 lives he had carried through a blizzard. Town residents greeted them as they passed. Mrs. Willoughby, an elderly woman with curled white hair tucked beneath a knitted cap, waved from her storefront. "Morning, Ethan. The little ones look wonderful." Ethan lifted his hand politely. "Thanks to Lena's miracle work." Lena Torres herself appeared moments later from the clinic doorway, wearing her padded burgundy coat and a scarf patterned with small paw prints. Her dark hair, braided neatly over her shoulder, brushed against her cheek as she stepped into the cold. She offered Ethan a tired but genuine smile, the kind that only grew as she looked at Charlie navigating through the snow. "He's improved again," she said softly. "More control in the front legs. His endurance is incredible." "Stubbornness," Ethan replied with a grin. "He didn't learn that from me at all." Lena huffed a quiet laugh. "You all right heading up the trail? The snow's starting sooner than the forecast predicted." Ethan glanced at the first flurries drifting heavier now. "We'll get home before it thickens. Cabin's stocked." "Good," she said, her gaze lingering on the quartet a moment longer. "You take care, Ethan." He nodded, then turned toward the forest road that climbed toward his mountain cabin. The walk was slow but peaceful. The dogs traveled as a unit, each step measured and practiced. Bravo flanked the left, watchful. Delta zigzagged ahead, every movement bursting with excitement. Charlie rolled at Ethan's heel like a miniature commander maintaining formation. The sky above was a pale silver, thickening with snow clouds. The cold settled deeper, but Ethan no longer felt it as a threat. It was simply winter returning, the cycle of the mountains. By the time they reached the clearing, the world had transformed into a quiet, white realm. Snow dusted the rooftop, thickened the pine branches, blanketed the steps of the cabin. Ethan paused to take it in. This place had once been a sanctuary of isolation, a tomb where he hid from grief, guilt, and memories he had no strength to carry. Now it was something different, a home, a base, a place with warmth. Bravo nudged his leg. Delta pressed herself against his thigh. Charlie gently bumped into his boot before rolling back again. Ethan crouched down slowly, letting the 3 pups gather around him. Their bodies pressed close, radiating warmth like small furnaces beneath the winter sky. He wrapped his arms around all 3, the old parka enveloping them in a cocoon of heat. The snow fell thicker, silent, serene. He lowered his head and whispered, "I thought I was saving you 3. Bravo's tail thumped softly. Delta licked his wrist. Charlie rested his chin over Ethan's knee and stared up with those dark, unyielding eyes. Ethan tightened his embrace, feeling their breaths against his chest. "But the truth is, you 3 saved me." The cabin behind them glowed with the promise of warmth. The forest around them stood silent, respectful, and for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, Ethan felt the season shifting, not just around him, but inside him. Winter had come again. But within this small wooden house, guided by 3 beating hearts, spring had already begun. In the quiet glow of that winter cabin, 3 small lives reminded us that miracles rarely arrive with thunder. They come softly, in the warmth of breath returning, in the stubborn will to rise again, In the unexpected ways, love rebuilds what was broken. Some say luck saved them. Ethan knew better. In moments where hope should have failed, something greater stepped in, something only God's hand could guide. And the truth is, those same quiet miracles still move through our everyday lives, through kindness, through compassion, through every choice we make to protect what is fragile and good. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a reminder that light still wins. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and may God bless every viewer who walks this journey with us. May He watch over you just as He watched over them.